Happy New Year for those of you who celebrate, and for those of you who don't, I'm so sorry you're stuck in 2006. But it's 2024, a year full of opportunity. They just reused these assets from last year. Last year, I made a video talking about my most wanted video game sequels. So I thought it was time to flip that coin and talk about my most wanted remakes. So what better way to start this than by talking about what actually defines a video game remake? Video game remakes have become a lot more prominent in recent years, so much so that remakes are now being nominated for Game of the Year. Personally, I think they should get their own category at the Game Awards as to not take away from the brand new offerings each year. And that's about as far as I'll ever get into politics on this platform. Back in the heyday of the 7th generation of consoles, we were force-fed HD collections of classic game franchises. But the HD just stood for, how's this? These are remasters, with more recent equivalents being things like the Ezio, Nathan Drake and Master Chief collections. The games are just prettied up by giving them a higher frame rate and resolution alongside some potential quality of life additions. And sometimes games are just put on a different console with no changes or improvements. These are what we call ports. But the definition of a remake lies in the word itself. No, the other bit. A remake is when the game is literally rebuilt from the ground up. It's an experience that's made with current hardware and audiences in mind while keeping what appealed to the original fans. Some examples of recent remakes include the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, the Resident Evil remakes, and Demon's Souls for the PS5. So, here's my wishlist for potential remakes and remasters in no particular order. Before getting to the main games I had in mind for this video, I wanted to go through some of the other remakes I want to see. I just don't have as much to say about them as other entries. The Star Wars Force Unleashed video games are looked back on quite fondly by a lot of fans. So much so that people are constantly asking for Starkiller to come back into the franchise either through a new game or just a cameo in a game or show. The recent games following Cal Kestis have been really good. I know that they had technical issues on launch, but following patches, both games are just brilliant in my opinion. I think remaking the Force Unleashed games for current platforms would be hugely successful, and the series does have room for a remake, with the Knights of the Old Republic remake currently being in limbo. The original actor for Starkiller, Sam Witwer, is still very involved with the franchise, with his most notable role being Darth Maul in Clone Wars and Solo. Considering how much he clearly loves working on the series, I'm sure he'd be up to reprise his role as Starkiller in a new game.
I can see him in my mind's eye. Kenobi.
Also, I just really want to see this cutscene with modern day visuals.
You agreed to stay away!
I lied.
I'm not much of a Soulsborne fan. To be fair, I am looking at changing that soon, but Bloodborne has been hailed as one of the greatest games of all time, so having it locked on the PS4 at 30 frames per second should be a crime. Honestly, just a remaster on the PS5 with an updated frame rate and resolution would be great. Actually, I think people would just be happy with a patch to let it run better on PS5. Bloodborne fans are just starving right now. Jump Superstars was a 2D Shonen Jump crossover fighting game for the DS which only released in Japan. I think this is just what we need considering how recent Jump games have turned out. Jump Force was a disaster. They gave Majin Buu realistic teeth and included Boruto in the base game over Madara. I think a modern day remake of Jump Superstars is just what we need to celebrate the stories of Shonen Jump. If only there was a developer with experience making faithful, well-received 2D fighting games based on popular franchises. And with those done, time for the stuff I either really want to see happen, or I see being a no-brainer for the companies that own these IPs. Rare was one of the titans of video game development in the 1990s, creating classic experiences like Donkey Kong 64, GoldenEye 64, Star Fox Adventures, and Perfect Dark. And in September 2002, Rare was purchased by Microsoft for $375 million, despite the fact that they primarily developed games for Nintendo consoles. And since then, Rare has only worked with Nintendo on handheld experiences, as their home console exploits were now on Microsoft's platforms. Two of Rare's most prominent series, Conker and Banjo-Kazooie, have fallen from grace since appearing on Xbox. Conker was given a remake for the original Xbox called Conker Live and Reloaded, which featured greatly improved visuals and an online multiplayer mode, while Banjo-Kazooie got a brand new game in Nuts and Bolts, which was a major departure from the series' roots as it focused on racing and building cars rather than platforming and collecting. Rare have worked on a wide range of Microsoft games since the acquisition. They made Viva Pinata, Cameo, Sea of Thieves, and they were banished to the hellish realm of developing early Kinect games for some reason. With Banjo and Kazooie appearing in Smash Ultimate and their games coming to Nintendo Switch Online, it's clear that they haven't been forgotten about. Remaking the Banjo games and Conker's Bad Fur Day would give Microsoft some brand new compelling exclusive games, and it could even open the door for brand new adventures featuring these beloved characters. Quick note I wanted to end this section on: it turns out that there are two separate Conker games, Conker's Other Bad Day and Conker Getting Medieval, which were both shelved by Microsoft. And don't even get me started on Project Spark.
I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
I think Transformers has had a pretty rocky road in media since the mid-2000s, and it's all thanks to one man in particular.
I've come.
They're cars that transform into massive robots. That's awesome, you don't have to change much, but in comes Mikey with his bullshit.
What he did so with honor, dignity, damn
And everyone thinks Transformers are lame. I do think that they are starting to claw the franchise's reputation back with movies like Bumblebee and the one with Monkey Prime, but there's so much more media that people can dive into. Transformers has had the whole spectrum of video game adaptations. They've had the Pokémon style dual release, the well-received Faithful adaptation, and even Angry Birds. But the best ones have to be the Cybertron series, games following the Transformers during the war for control of Cybertron and the eventual fall of the planet, and the terrible crossover with the Mark Wahlberg movie that we really don't need to talk about.
I'm an inventor.
The Transformers Cybertron games are third-person shooters that explore arguably the most interesting part of the Transformers lore. You got to play as a ton of iconic characters like Bumblebee, Optimus, Starscream, and
my good friend the Black Transformer Jazz,
as they all play a part in the war and eventual destruction of Cybertron. And I cannot stress enough how fucking insane the Metroplex section is. You have to direct a city-level Transformer to tear through enemies and cannons with his bare fucking hands. The games also had a pretty involved multiplayer scene where you can make your own Transformer and compete in modes like Team Deathmatch and Capture the Flag. The fanbase is that invested in these games that the multiplayer can still be played on PC if you connect to servers being run by players. If these games were remade or even remastered and bundled together as a Transformers Cybertron collection for current gen consoles, I think it would go a long way to healing everyone's inner child that was traumatized by Michael Bay. I spoke about Wrath of Cortex back in 2022, and if you're thinking of watching that video, don't, it's fucking terrible. The game has its fair share of flaws, like the underwhelming boss fights, janky hitboxes, and the inclusion of more vehicles than your average episode of Top Gear. But despite these, I genuinely think this game has the chance to be a great Crash adventure if given another chance. Crash has to go up against the perfect version of himself alongside 4 evil masks with the power to control the elements. Instead of giving Crash the revolutionary skills of military intervention and sneaking, maybe throw in the masks from It's About Time so Crash can even the playing field. And while we're making changes, maybe throw in some new levels featuring the bosses from the original games posing an actual threat instead of being glorified obstacles. No matter how angry the Crash Bandicoot games are able to make me, I still love them. And Wrath of Cortex holds a special place for me as it was one of the big games of my childhood. At this point, the loading screens play in my head whenever I lose track of a conversation at work.
So I know it's easy for your mind to wander.
I just think it would be an awesome throwback for the fanbase, and a lot of people will get a kick out of seeing Crunch in the new games. And while you're at it, why not look into remaking Twinsanity as well? I'm gonna be real honest, I don't know a whole lot about Final Fantasy IX. Main things I know include it was the series' last entry on the original PlayStation, it's one of the most beloved games in the entire franchise.
Final Fantasy IX is the best. Well, you heard it here from the man himself.
And I like the look of this guy. So far, I've played 15, 16, 7 Remake, and a bit of 10. But I'm looking forward to changing that. And there have been rumours of a remake of Final Fantasy IX swirling around the internet for years. I know this won't be given the same level of commitment and attention as the 7 remakes because 7's the golden child and every other numbered entry has to survive on its own, but if the 7 remake treatment is given to 9 without it becoming a trilogy that deviates from the main story, I think it would be well received by fans, and it would probably get a lot of people to try the original PS1 game, myself included. I've only recently started playing Fallout New Vegas, but my god, I finally understand why people rave about this game. And recently learning that Obsidian offered to make a New Vegas style game in the Elder Scrolls series to pad out the timeline between Bethesda entries infuriates me to no end.
I mean, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm really asking.
During the court case concerning Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, a lot of future projects from Microsoft were detailed. 2 of the projects contained within the documents were remasters for Fallout 3 and Oblivion. If Microsoft is remastering Fallout 3, why not go ahead and remaster New Vegas too? While I'd personally prefer New Vegas to be fully remade from the ground up, a remaster in line with these other projects is a lot more likely. I think that a New Vegas remake with updated visuals similar to Starfield would be welcomed by players with open arms. It could even lead to another collaboration between Bethesda and Oblivion, seeing as they're both now under the Microsoft umbrella. On top of this, a remake would have the chance to fix some of the original issues. Stuff like the invisible walls, bland colour palette, and UI could all be things of the past with a definitive edition of the best entry in the modern Fallout franchise. The Persona series is huge, with each game getting a huge amount of love. 3 is getting a remake this year, 4 got an insanely good fighting game developed by Arc Systems, and Persona 5 got multiple spin-offs and representation in Smash Bros. And don't forget about Persona 1 and 2, they got... While that is probably due to Persona 3 signifying a major shift in the franchise and bringing it more towards modern standards, it's still disappointing that the older games aren't mentioned nearly as much. 10 years before Persona 3 released, the game that kicked off the franchise, Revelations Persona, was released on the original PlayStation. After that, Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Persona 2 Eternal Punishment were released on the same console. They all received PSP ports, but the official games aren't very accessible in current year. Remakes in a style similar to the current Persona games would be huge. Obviously not straight away, as we're already getting 3 Reload this year, but it could be a smart move after the eventual release of Persona 6. Persona 1 and 2 becoming more relevant could open the door for more representation through spin-offs, anime, movies, manga, and inclusion in new crossover titles. Atlus would be absolutely swimming in it. I'm a simple man. I like simple things. If you make a series of games including superpowers, player choices being given actual weight, and women with dyed hair, of course I'm going to carry out my God-given duty and stimulate the economy. The Infamous series has more games than I expected it to. There are 2 main games on PS3 alongside a digital spin-off centered around... vampires?
You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?!
And there were also 2 games released on PS4, Infamous Second Son and First Light. Having the original games on PS5 with Ghost of Tsushima level visuals would be insane. The original games are still stranded on the PS3, among other things.
No, it's been a long fight. It's been a long fight, and I just had to have a warrior spirit.
At the moment, it doesn't look like Sony has any big exclusives lined up. It felt like the PS5 was building up to titles like God of War Ragnarok and Spider-Man 2. And now that they're here, we really don't know what to expect. Bringing some classic franchises back from the brink of death would be a massive win for PlayStation, and I can't think of many franchises more deserving than Infamous. I said many. There are very few video game franchises with more remakes than Pokémon. We've had remakes of Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, Ruby and Sapphire, and... So naturally, I'm going to talk about Black and White. I mean, I would if it wasn't obviously going to happen. But for now, I'm going to venture off the beaten path. Pokemon spin-off games are also eligible for remakes, with the original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon getting remade in 2020. So why not give this treatment to a beloved spin-off in Pokemon Colosseum? Right now, the only way to play Colosseum through legit methods is through the GameCube game, and like most Pokemon games, it's more than retained its value since release. Colosseum has so many cool additions to the series that haven't been seen since. The protagonist having a connection to the evil team, shadow Pokemon, a desert that looks better than the one on Switch, and the ability to actually steal other people's Pokemon. And of course, I want a HD version of the main man himself, Mirror B. If you encounter this man, 9 times out of 10 he's carrying at least 3 Ludicolo on his belt. You'll be cutting shaves whether you want to or not. I think the Pokemon franchise would benefit hugely from embracing their massive catalogue of previous titles and giving them some more attention, and Colosseum is a brilliant place to start. And those are the remakes that I really want to see. I think remakes have an important role within the gaming industry. They bring beloved classics in line with current standards, they make genre-defining experiences available on more platforms, and they have a chance to become the definitive version of a piece of art. And above all else, they destroy my faith in the human race.